Hi, it's Amy Shaw here. It's August 17th, 2016, and I'm so excited to finally be able to record this video. I've been working on it for about a week. Pretty intense information. I just wanted to sort of collaborate it and put it together in the most succinct way that I possibly could so that I'm not rambling and I can keep your attention long enough. I feel like what I really have to say is really, really important, or I wouldn't take my time doing this. I want to preface it by saying that pretty much everything that I'm presenting here is theory, meaning that it's obviously not scientific fact. It's mostly based on my own life experience and a culmination of books that I've read over the years, people that I've listened to over the years, discussions that I've engaged in, all sort of culminating together to bring me to this point of my understanding, which I am now going to disperse to you. Another thing I want to say is that my ideas, as I'm going to express them to you right now, are not entirely unique. There's other people out there in the world who are also obviously expressing similar ideas and have similar thoughts. I haven't come across anybody yet that's exactly talking about this in the way that I'm talking about it, using the language that I'm using. There's a few prominent people that have influenced me in my life, particularly recently, a reintroduction in particular to some of this type of information. But again, the language is very different. So I feel like what I'm offering is sort of a translation to an audience that might resonate with it more. My message is for Christians. There's going to be elements in it that are going to be uncomfortable, that you're not going to like, but my language is decidedly Christian. My references mostly from the Bible and my experience as a Christian. And so I would say my message mostly is for Christian people. However, it's not entirely for Christian people because I'm not going to spend the time here getting bogged down in specific scriptures and specific theology and specific doctrine. Not at all. I'm going to assume that my audience knows this, and if they don't, that you guys will look it up in the Bible if you're interested. I just hope that you stay tuned. What I'm talking about today is specifically the Antichrist, who the Antichrist is, who the Antichrist isn't, how it relates to us, how it relates to the Mandela effect, and most excitedly, how it relates to this particular time in our history and what's coming next. So bear with me. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I actually recorded this whole entire thing earlier, and the video quality is horrid. It's super slow and sluggish. The sound was horrible. So I had to come back in here and re-record this whole thing. So I've already have everything scribbled out on paper, which actually is probably a good thing for you because it means you don't have to sit here and watch me scribble it all out. I'm going to just be putting the scribbles that I've already put pretty much up on the easel here as I talk about it. So we're actually going to save some time that way. So I just want to start out by talking about consciousness and how human beings historically have sort of known themselves, experienced themselves, defined themselves. This here that I drew is a representation of what I would call the Golden Age. The Golden Age was an era of human history that goes way, way, way back, prior to the time of the sky gods coming to the earth. So however you want to define the sky gods, that's your business. You can research it and do that on your own time. I'm just saying the time before the sky god came, this is basically how we know from archaeological evidence, from records, how people organize their understanding of themselves and how they understand each other in community. So if this is each individual person, basically this represents the heart, what we would call the heart in today's language. And people basically understood everything and had all knowledge coming to them through the heart. In this era of human history, we did not have science, technology, we did not have rational materialism. We just had the very basic sort of way of being, living in the jungle, living in the desert, wherever people were living, trying to survive and thrive and grow community. And the only way we had of knowing at that point in human history was basically an inner knowing, what our direct experience taught us and how that integrated and then was taught down to the next generation. So this way of knowing was a very heart-connected way of knowing, a heart-centered way of knowing. And in this way, people related to each other more like this, in a very linear fashion, only in the sense that they were connected in the heart, and through this heart connection, they had direct connection to source, or the collective unconscious up here. Now, there was some division between people, but the whole essence of the experience was that people operated as one. There was no such thing truly as individual in the tribal communities. It was more a group collective, and everybody operated as one, connected to source through the heart. Okay, now the next sort of giant step in the evolutionary process for human consciousness came at this level, and this was perhaps the time right around when Jesus was on the earth, that era, maybe a little bit before that, certainly a little bit after that, but that whole sort of era of our evolution is represented by this that I drew. Now, what this represents is, again, individual people, a definite, more clear separation between individuals. There's still a heart knowing, that heart center. The difference is that the heart became sort of split off in a sense, and we started to recognize that there was a distinction between thoughts and feelings. That's similar to how we experience our consciousness today, except for the difference being that thoughts and feelings both were thought to occur in what was termed the heart. We see this representation very clearly in the Bible. The Bible oftentimes, especially in the Old Testament, will use, well, in the New Testament as well, will use the word heart, and it really was referring to this dynamic of the thoughts and feelings both occurring in the heart center. So I looked at some information about this dynamic, and what I found was a website, and I'm just going to read for you what it said. Moderns, meaning us, speak of learning by heart, by which they mean rote memory. For instance, I memorized by heart, or I know it by heart. In other words, when we say that, what we're really meaning is by our memory, our intellectual mind. This is a modern phenomenon. In the Bible, however, learning by heart is not like memorizing the multiplication tables. It must be mixed with spiritual affections. The Lord complains of apostate Israel that their worship is made up of only rules taught by men, but their hearts are far from me. Isaiah 29:13. So there's a distinction between rules by men, but the heart not being connected. It's because both things were thought to occur in the same place, which is the heart, but we see a clear division happening between the two. The heart functions as a conscience. After David showed insubordination against the anointed king by cutting off the corner of his robe, his heart smote him, Isaiah 24:5. And after Peter's sermon, the audience was cut to the heart, Acts 2:37. The heart may condemn us, but God is greater than hearts, 1 John 3:20. David prays that God would create for him a pure heart to replace his defiled conscience, Psalms 51:10. Moderns do not normally associate the brain-mind with both rational and non-rational activities, yet the ancients did not divorce them. Psalms 24 is another example that's given of that. Now, something I commonly hear as I interact with Christian people, and I talk more and more about the inner way of knowing and taking that journey into know it within your heart, I'm usually met with the same response, which is Jeremiah 17:9. It's the most infamous, well, besides the salvation verses, it's one of the most infamous verses that I've ever come across truly in debate amongst Christians. And it says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" In some translations, it says the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. beyond cure. So a lot of times Christians will use this verse as a way to say that that's not a legitimate way of knowing, that we can't know by the heart. Well, here's an interesting thing. I looked up that word heart in that verse, and I looked it up in the Strong's lexicon, and I'm just going to see if I can zoom in here to show you what that pretty little Hebrew word looks like there. The actual word is lev, and I'm not sure if I'm actually pronouncing that right because I didn't take the time to research the pronunciation, but it's L-E-B, lev, transliteration. It's actually a masculine noun. I think that's very important. While most of the verbiage in Hebrew is masculine in the Bible, and there are instances, and several of them, where it's a more female word. I think the fact that this word heart in Jeremiah is masculine, and actually the whole entire chapter of Jeremiah 7 has the word heart several times. The whole chapter really is about God's communicating and positioning with the judgment of man's heart. So if you're interested in that, go back and read it. If you don't know much about the Bible, I encourage you to read it because it is enlightening. And I just want to point out that in every instance that it occurs in that section of Jeremiah, it is this same translation, and it is a masculine noun as opposed to a feminine noun. The actual translation of it in biblical usage, starting number 1, it means inner man, mind, will, heart, understanding. The subheading of that is inner part or midst of things, heart of man, soul, heart of man, mind, knowledge, thinking, reflection, memory, inclination, resolution, determination, conscience, heart of moral character. So over and over we see that basically the description of what heart means, not only in Jeremiah, but overall in this time of the Bible, is this, the place where thoughts and feelings occur, and it's the source of consciousness, or conscience, what some would term like the superego. Okay, I'm going to take this back up here because it's really important, and I wanted the heart to be at the center of everything I'm saying to you today. Okay, just to do a really quick, brief summary. So here was the initial state of humankind. We evolved into this state of seeing the heart as thoughts and feelings. And then the next stage of our evolution, where we are at now. Now keep in mind there's gradients in between. It's not just a whoop, whoop, and whoop. It's obviously a curve of evolution slowly coming in. Here was about 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and here we are now. So this process was indeed a process. But here basically is what our state of consciousness or understanding ourselves looks like today. Here we have individuals. They're clearly separated, divided between each other. And there's a clear distinction between what we call the heart and what we call the mind. Obviously, thoughts are what occur in the mind, and feelings are what occur in the heart. So we have this clear distinction that we haven't had historically in our understanding of ourselves. By the way, I'm once again in my craft room because I knew that I wanted to do this in a more teaching format. I thought the cleanest way to do it would probably be through like a PowerPoint, but how boring is that? It's so much more interesting to watch people move and talk, right? So the best way for me to do that was to do this in sort of a teaching classroom type format. And so I came in here because I have this lovely easel that I showed you before in one of my videos. And I just want to point out, because my husband's so awesome that he made this thing. My request was that we had an easel that would float out to where we could actually use it with the ledge for painting, but that when it wasn't in use, we could lay it flat against the wall. And it's not even entirely flat right now because the pegs are down there sort of preventing me from pushing it back. But when it's in its flattest position, it's completely flat against the wall. That way it doesn't take up floor space that's needed during a time when someone's not in here painting. So my husband actually crafted this from scratch, and I'm totally thankful for that. Amazing. It's what's allowing me to do this presentation for you right now. Anyway, back to business. So the next model that I drew basically is a representation, and please, I'm sorry, I don't claim to be the most perfect drawer in the world. I was just trying to sketch these out really fast. So the next model of representation here is basically modern man. This is what we are now with the heart and the mind and our separate understanding of these two things. Here's what I would call source or God, our understanding of our connection beyond ourselves. And if you drew a line between the mind and the heart and to source and went this way both ways, you can clearly see that this is a triune sort of relationship where all things function in a perfect symmetrical manner, in the ideal. One of the things that happened when the sky gods came is that there was a clear sort of shift in consciousness. And we can see this once again in archaeological evidence, in documentation, all kinds of things that point us to the fact that when the sky gods came down, there was a clear shift. There was a shift between being a much more matriarchal, woman-centered society to a much more patriarchal, male-centered society. So we could fairly say that what the sky gods brought to us was this patriarchal notion of the way things should be. Along with that, seeded this sort of rationalism that started down here when we started identifying the thoughts and separating them from feelings in some sort of way that made them distinct, yet still related. And as it evolved and carried through, we came to this point where there was a clear distinction between thoughts and feelings and even where they occurred. What happened is this rationalism came in and this actually cut off the mind from the heart to be so distinctly separate that the two things weren't even related anymore. We grew this sort of dichotomy, this duality, this male, this female, this black, this white, this left brain, the right brain, the emotion, the rational intellect. That's what we see going on here. And this is basically a representation of where we're at today. Before I go on to the next aspect of this, I want to just spend a moment here to say that this cut off, this split, has really created and produced many, many multiple human beings with experiencing this, okay? And many, many people experience this over time, has obviously built up an entire culture, a culture that is cut off from aspects of the heart. We're going to get to that in a little bit more detail later, but I just want to point that out here at this juncture and make that clear. Okay, my next drawing is much more complicated. This is where we're going to get bogged down a little bit, and it's going to be really intense and a little bit difficult to follow me. Hopefully not. I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible, but please follow. I'm telling you, the end game is going to be awesome. Just keep listening, okay? So here we have, once again, I know I scribbled all over it. I almost should just draw it over again. Here we have the man as we are now, okay? Here we have heart, and here we have mind, completely separate. So here we have what we would call the heart, our emotional center. It's the thing that really truly makes us human beings, you know, our ability to feel, to have compassion, to have love, to hurt, to experience sorrow. Here's the heart. Here again, up here we see the brain or the mind, the rational thought, okay? Rationalism, okay? This is the way through evolution that we have been taught to understand and to know ourselves through rationalism, through the brain. We're really taught, you know, emotions don't matter, that they're not real, that they're not significant, that we shouldn't really pay attention to them, we shouldn't make decisions by them, we shouldn't listen to them. And so this split that was caused way back, that still continues, actually what happens is we grow this society that's more and more interested in knowing self through rationalism, or what some psychologists would call our ego knowing of ourselves. and it creates, like I said over here, so many other human beings in a society that's so much entrenched in this, that we begin experiencing more and more the cutoff of this, which looks like a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse, just a lot of difficulty in relationships, a lot of feelings of isolation, aloneness, purposelessness, meaninglessness. All these things sort of come in and they taint the heart. And this is why I have all these, this is all the damage, the trauma, the cycle, the childhoods and the indoctrination, the overculture. This is what this does to us, okay? Now, this wants to express itself. It's not really allowed to express itself in our culture. There's no acceptable mode for that. So what happens is it bubbles up into our conscious mind, our understanding of ourselves. But because we aren't really allowed to express it, we create sort of this shadow where we keep pushing it back, pushing it back, pushing it back. And over so many generations of this happening, pushing back, we've created this really large shadow. Now, what this shadow is, I know it sounds very like spooky and scary, ooh, shadow. It really is just an unconsciousness. It's a lack of consciousness. So this wounding, all this hurt, trauma, it's bubbling up into the mind and it's wanting expression out, but it's finding place here in the shadow aspects, the unconscious aspects of ourselves. This is the part that denies, that's shoved down, that's refused to acknowledge the heart. Okay, so what happens is this sits here in the shadow and it becomes a channel, not only for all this stuff, this trauma and this hurt, it also becomes a channel for other forces, other supernatural sort of forces outside of ourselves, because we still are these human beings back here, and our basic core soul state of who we are, it's this. Very still connected to source, to, the higher dimensions. And so what's happening is the shadows creating sort of a gateway for not only this stuff to come up and sit in here and hide, but also to attract this other stuff that's coming through the collective unconscious. And what makes up the collective unconscious is everybody's thoughts and feelings all throughout human history ever. It sort of goes out there and it floats around. I know it's hard to understand, but it's like a giant river where one goes to the next, and it just moves on. And so many millions of people now, all pushing their thoughts out and getting their thoughts in, creates this stream river of consciousness. And whether we know it or not, we still are functioning as one. So when we have this shadow, it actually opens up a gate. It provides a hiding space for these more negative sort of influences in the collective unconscious to come in here and sort of sit and manifest themselves. Because we're not conscious of them, they're there and we don't even really realize it. So the next thing I want to talk about is ego. So ego basically is our forward-facing sort of way of knowing ourselves. And I don't just mean like ego, how we feel about ourselves. A lot of people misunderstand ego when they think, oh, someone with a big ego is someone who has this inflated sense of self. That's one aspect of it. But in actuality, ego is really just simply the way of knowing ourselves. So any thought that we have pretty much is going to be an aspect of ego. Now, the shadow may play a part. I'm not saying that. I'm saying a conscious thought that comes to us is pretty much what we would call the ego. So it's like saying, oh, I look really fat. Oh, I'm having a really bad hair day. Oh, I'm going to do really awesome at that interview today. Or, oh, I'm really nervous. These are ways that we know ourselves. And then also other people is through the processing of information, thoughts, through the ego self. What ego actually is, it's a collection of constructs, so beliefs and ideas that we've been enculturated to through our parents, through our siblings, through our extended family, through our culture, through our society, through our nationality, through our world understanding. All of that creates sort of a collective construct that defines us through our ego. within the ego, there's a thing called constellations. Constellations are things that sort of make up certain belief systems. That sort of coalesce together and create constellations within us. Okay, so the next thing I did is I drew this little guy out here because I wanted to sort of demonstrate how all of this dynamic interplays with how we have relationships with other people outside of us. So basically, let's say that this is a guy that we come across in a convenience store, okay? And he's really rude, or we think he's being really rude, right? Well, we have this core wounding here, maybe perhaps from our childhood, where we were raised and we always felt very small and belittled by our parents, like we could never do anything right? So we're carrying this wounding and we haven't really, it's sort of bubbled up into the shadow. We haven't really worked through it. I mean, we're kind of aware that it's there. We're kind of, because we remember what it was like being a kid and it sucked. And maybe we've even done a little bit of therapy, but we really haven't cleared it out fully. It's just still sitting there. So it's sitting here in the shadow. And then what happens is we meet this guy and, he's just a little bit of, maybe he kind of reminds me of my dad a little bit, but I can't quite consciously say, oh, that guy's just like my dad. It's just this feeling that I have about him, and it makes me just instantly trigger all of this. And so out of this shadow, I start projecting all of this onto this guy. Well, this guy right here, he's having a crappy day, but he's a pretty awesome guy. I mean, he goes to church and he believes in Jesus and he just thinks he's a pretty awesome guy, But he stops at the convenience store to go get milk because, gosh darn it, his wife was supposed to do that today and she didn't do it. And he's a little ticked off and irritated by it. And, he's kind of got some woundings too. Maybe he's got a little bit of childhood wounding too that he hasn't really worked through, but it's okay because he has Jesus. So he's doing good. He's doing what he's supposed to be. And he's not worried about all that stuff, right? Because he's healed by the blood of Jesus. So he goes into the convenience store and he maybe is a little bit abrasive, but he doesn't even realize it because you know what? He's got Jesus, right? So he's talking and he's a little abrasive and this one here is like, and pretty soon this one's seeing this one in only this way. And this one's seeing this way and only this way. And all of this is happening here. None of it's really happening here, heart to heart. It's all happening up here in this sort of dynamic, right? And see, the insidious thing about the ego is that it sort of has this way of convincing itself that it is the most important thing, right? That it is the light. So the thing about the ego is it sort of has this way of tricking us, of making us think that we are right, that we are righteous. And in that way, it sort of blinds us to the truth about ourselves. And it sort of serves as a split between the shadow so that we can't really see fully who we really are. We only mostly live in our front forward ego sense. So in this way, I guess you could kind of say that we've evolved from the heart split, the split of the mind and the heart, to now actually the split of the mind, right? A lot of splits happening, right? So all of this sort of gets projected out and out pictured onto people outside of us. And the thing of it is, everybody does this. This sounds like a very pathological condition. This is the human condition. This is the way all of us experience ourselves and live. So under this sort of way of being, in actuality, this guy here, I could stand before you today and say that I am exactly who you say I am. Because I could sit here and tell you that my skin is blue till the cows come home. I could turn off the lights to try to show you. I could bring over special lights to try to show you. I could go out in the sun to try to show you. I could show you old photographs to try to show you. But you're never going to believe me. No matter how much I tell you that my skin is blue, that my skin is blue. Because your reality is what you see me as right now. So how you see me is who I am. So who defines who I am? You do. Likewise, who defines who you are? Everybody else collectively does. Now that's not to say that we can't know ourselves, but how we know ourselves is not the same thing as how other people know us. Because we all are sort of doing this projection on each other. So in that aspect, under this sort of system, we all are nothing more than just mirrors of self. So when this person sees this guy as being, oh, what a jerk, really what's happening is all this shadow stuff is coming out. The person isn't conscious of it. They don't recognize it for what it is. It's coming out and bouncing off like a mirror. And what this person is seeing in this person is a bunch of triggered stuff, just a giant projection. Okay, the reason I wrote this up here, I remember now, I was trying to figure out why is that chocolate and those stars up there? Now I remember why I wrote that up there, because I wanted to share something with you that was actually written to me in a comment the other day. Okay, yeah, here it is. So the other day I was engaged in discussion, very civil discussion around the Mandela effect. And certain people are very, very disturbed by the Mandela effect. And they really want to hold on to this way of knowing, their rational, materialist way of knowing, their ego. All of this is so firmly rooted in their faith. And because this is being shooken up right now for everybody, a lot of people are kind of running scared and they're reacting very impulsively out of ego. So in that process, I've been attacked a lot and I've been told a lot of things, how I need to get right with Christ and I need to repent and on and on. People have their ideas and they believe what they believe, but that's just the thing, this is kind of coming at, it comes out of ego and saying that what I know and my way of knowing is the right way. Everybody says that, and that's why we're warring and fighting and bickering, and it's why this is happening. Anyway, what this individual said to me, and I'm quoting, "Unless we die to self," and it's spelled out capital S-E-L-F, "we can never have Christ Jesus live with us, being filled with the Holy Ghost by his grace, are saved through faith, and that is not of ourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." That really was a whole conglomeration of many different Bible verses, sort of pulled and strung together in sort of this nonsensical way that's supposed to make the person sound so uber ultra spiritual, right? In actuality, I'm not entirely sure what's being said here. I'm very familiar with all the verses that these statements come from, but the way they're all sort of conglomerated together sounds like a lot of Christianese to me, a lot of Christianese. Blah, 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 blah. The thing I wanted to point out, though, and I'm not trying to belittle anybody, I'm just expressing how truly insane it sounds to me. But the important thing I wanted to stress about what this individual said to me is the key word, "unless we die to self." Okay. Christians have this misunderstanding because Jesus said to deny ourselves, take up our cross. Several places in the Bible we see this phrase of dying to self. It was one of the primary things that was taught actually by Jesus, so it's an important thing to understand. But what was he actually talking about? So what Christians will say is that here's the world, right? Here's the world, what they call the world. And in this world is all these pleasures and temptations, chocolate, that's why I put the chocolate up here and all the little stars, all the little glitter and the things that dazzle us. And they say these are the things that pull us away from God. So when they say die to self, they're thinking in their ego state that it means to deny their flesh, to deny their human compulsions, to desire things that aren't good for us, to engage in activities that Christians deem sin or inappropriate. So that's what they mean when they say die to self. But in actuality, when he said or she said to me that I needed to die to self, there was some truth to that, because really dying to self, ego being self, means completely letting go of knowing myself through ego, which at this point in human history is through rational materialism. Okay, Christianity is just one of a million examples how rational materialism has penetrated into our cultures and our systems. It's the preferred way of knowing. It's how we got from being this people back here to being this people with split heart, to being this people with split heart and mind, to being this people with split mind. It's how we got here, rational materialism. And it's only sort of progressed and become worse. And this is our preferred way of knowing, you know? So Christians are still clinging to this as well. When they read their Bible, they study the Bible, and that's so apparent because the only thing that was really spouted out was parroting the Bible, the Bible, the Bible, all this stuff that was gleaned from rational materialism. Nothing that was said there was said truly from the heart. You see? Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to talk about is actually really exciting. It's the Christ and the Antichrist. So I started out by talking about who the two things are. Now, I'm not going to quote scripture for these because all Christians know that what I'm writing here is the truth of scripture. And for people that aren't familiar with scripture, it's going to resonate with you too because it's so enculturated. We pretty much know this. So on the side of the Christ, what we have is, as characteristics of Christ: love, compassion, healing, encouragement, forgiveness, knowing with a capital K, miracles, steadfast, submitted, and no scriptures. For Antichrist, we have accuser, slanderer, mocker, fiery darts, seeking to devour, destroyer, fear, doubt, injures, no scriptures as well, blasphemer, prideful. So in a lot of ways, we see these two things as dichotomies, sort of opposite, sort of a light and what we would call dark, light and dark, right? I would actually go so far as to say this is more, if you don't like the word Christ, how about this? Life. And how about this? Death. Maybe that's a better way to describe it for people who aren't familiar or comfortable with the terms Antichrist and the Christ, life and death. So life and anti-life, right? So we have these clear dichotomies, okay? What happens is that you get a lot of people, and what I want to point out too is that these are not fixed states. They're very transitory. And I've said this many, many times in many of my other videos, but I'm going to say it again. The perfect example of this really is the Apostle Peter. When Jesus was with his disciples and Peter was among them, he asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter, as always, chimed in and he said, "Lord, you're the God Most High, the Son of God." Really tooted his horn a little bit there. And Jesus said, "Yes, Peter, blessed are you. You've been given this knowledge by God, and, on you, Peter, my rock, I'm going to build my church." I'm sure Peter was like in his ego state. Yes, I'm awesome, right? The very next moment, Jesus starts talking about prophesying about his death, what's to come, what's to happen, the hard times that are ahead, trying to prepare his disciples. And once again, Peter chimes in, no, Lord, not you, not you. And what does Jesus say to him? He says, "Get behind me, Satan. You don't have the things of God in mind, but the things of man." So we see in a matter of minutes that Peter goes from being praised as having knowledge from God, knowing the things of God, to being rebuked and told that he's being an instrument of the devil. So these are states that we fluctuate in and out of all the time. Nobody is perfectly fixed in anyone. Now, people can become very fixed, okay? But the problem is that a lot of people, there's a difference between the light and the false light, okay? A lot of people, this false light represents the people that are in this group or believe that they are in this group. They believe that they're acting in love and compassion and healing and encouragement and forgiveness. They truly believe that this is their motive and this is what they're acting out of. When the truth of it is, they're really acting out of the shadow. And so because they haven't cleared all of that, what this comes across as sometimes from this wounding is more actually like this. But because the ego sort of blinds them to what's happening, they've convinced themselves they're this when they're actually this. And a perfect case in point was this individual that wanted to proceed to tell me that I needed to wake up, that I needed to be saved, this person believed in all self-righteousness, that they were operating under love and compassion and healing and all these things that represent life, because in their own minds, they're trying to, save me from the pits of hell. And so they think that it's out of compassion and love for my soul that they want to tell me how to live my life. In actuality, this is all this dynamic going on, and this sort of ego attachment to this rationalism, my understanding of the Bible, what I believe to be true, because my truth supersedes everybody else's truth. And so why? Because the Bible says so. So, it's this clinging on. And what that does is it's feeding into this shadow and working its way out. So this is what I would call, what a lot of people call, the false light, okay? The false light. And really, what's happening with these people is they're not truly, as the case I shared, they're not truly operating out of a heart space at all. They think that they are, but they're really not. Because people that are taking those words, it feels obvious. It doesn't feel loving to me. It doesn't feel healing and encouraging to me. When you tell me, wake up, you're going to go to hell, that doesn't sound encouraging to me. That doesn't sound like forgiveness. It doesn't sound like miracles. It doesn't sound like any of these. And for the record, I put no scriptures on both sides here, not because I really feel that that's an imperative aspect, but because for Christians, people like that who write, and if you counter them with scripture, they'll say, because they're accusers and they're slanderers and they're mockers, because they're mockers, they'll say, well, even the devil knows scriptures. So that's why I put that down here, because Christians understand that Satan, the Antichrist, death, anti-life, knows scriptures equally. So, but it isn't really imperative to understand that outside of that context. It's just another way, though, that the shadow kind of comes in and plays into this whole thing. And so the important thing, really, distinguishing or discerning between the light and the false light is really easy. It comes down to the state of the heart. And you know somebody's state of heart just because. Are they being accusing and slandering and mocking? And these are all the signs that we know where somebody's coming from. Because if they're coming from their heart, we're not going to see any of this, right? This is what we're going to see. We're going to see it in the language they use and the approach that they use, right? And so that's the basic part of discerning the state of somebody's heart, really. Very easy. Now, one of the things that Christians will say, they'll frequently say, well, they're wolves in sheep's clothing. You have to watch out. There's wolves in sheep's clothing. Well, again, I talked about that before. And what I want to say about wolves in sheep's clothing is that a wolf is a predator, right? Its intention is to eat. So if it's putting on something false or fake to sort of fit into the crowd so that it won't get seen, it's very intentional. It's doing this with very clear intention because it wants to eat. And so in that state of being, this intention is not, we cannot say that it's entirely unconscious. This is a conscious decision to act like, smell like, talk like, walk like a sheep so that I can blend in with the specific intention to kill, devour, destroy, eat, right? So when we just say to each other, left and right, wolves in sheep's clothing, you're wolves in sheep's clothing, I think we're totally misunderstanding and not discerning correctly what exactly that is. Can people actually become so engulfed with their shadow that they get in a more fixed position of this? Well, absolutely they can. They absolutely can. These are people that are so deeply wounded from whatever, it might not even, and the thing of it is it might not even be, something as traumatic as someone else has gone through, and worked through. But it doesn't have to, people are different and how they process different. It can be even a small thing that just grew a seed. And because of that large ego already, and that unwillingness to sort of process it, just shoves it back, and keeps it down into this shadow. And eventually this shadow grows. And the more unconsciousness that grows, the more disconnection from the heart that grows, the more these sort of entities start coming in and having a field day. They're feeding off that energy, fear and destruction, and they start having a field day. And this person can get very, very bogged down and entrenched. And they might even get to the point where they will consciously tell you, I'm choosing darkness. I know what I am, and I'm choosing this. I'm choosing it. And they'll have a lot of reasons why. They're legitimate reasons. They'll say, well, there's more power on the dark side, or, whatever. There's a lot of different reasons. Or it's really fun to manipulate people. It's really fun to, play all these little games. I like it. I like to see people, to create fear. I like to mock people and watch them get all huffy and upset. So there is people that exist that are conscious of what they're doing, and they know it. But how conscious are they really? I mean, at some point, you kind of cross over into full demon possession. And the thing of it is, we all have soul seed in us. So it's just very, 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 very overtaken is what happens. But the important thing that I really want to stress is that this happens to Christians as well. I have certainly met many, many, many Christians that are operating on this. And, you see a lot of infighting in the church going on because people really aren't living in Christ, the heart of Christ. And it's not that they're bad people. They may not even intentionally be doing this. It's that they're totally, totally unconscious of the fact that they're doing it. So the key point I want to make here is that the true enemy is truly not the Antichrist. The true enemy is unconsciousness. It's our lack of consciousness. It's the lack of seeing our own hearts and our own selves. Maybe in this way, Jeremiah was right. The heart is deceitful. But to say it's beyond cure, I think that that's one of the biggest lies of Christianity. And I know that's shocking to say that. It comes from the Bible. Am I saying the Bible's a lie? Well, I can only tell you from direct experience that I do not believe that the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. I just don't believe it. I'm looking at it from a perspective of this going on, the influence of rational materialism going on, and how that might have influenced even a prophet of God to make statements that ultimately may have been part of perpetuating and planting that seed for a purpose. Because don't think for even 1 second that these two things are completely separate, that they're completely divided. These two are actually one of the same. They're just mirrors. That's all that is. It's a mirror, one to the other. It's actually one thing that's whole. So our job at this point is to go in and repair this, fix this, do the work, do the work, do the work. Go in there, shine a light into that darkness. Become more and more and more conscious of ourselves, our motives, what's really going on. What really is underneath this fear? What really is underneath all of this? What's causing this? What's underneath this self-righteousness, this feeling that I'm getting saved and you're not? These are the things that we have to explore within ourselves and not get stuck on, well, because the Bible says so, because I believe the Bible. This is rational materialism. We are moving away, evolving away from this. It's crumbling. And for those of you that are still clinging on to it, it's going to be very, very hard for you. So I encourage you to start working on this now, going into this heart space, doing this work, and start clearing this out, okay? As we clear it out, it's not so much that we're eliminating this, it's that we're integrating it, okay? We're integrating it. This is what's happening, okay? Because this is one thing. It's just mirrored, one thing mirrored. So really to sum this up, to say, who is the Antichrist? I've kind of described the characteristics of the Antichrist, but who really is the Antichrist? The Antichrist is you. The Antichrist is me. It's shocking, right? The important thing, though, to take away from this as well is that a lot of Christians think like Jesus is coming down from the clouds and it's going to be this glorious rapture where all of us who have been these faithful, rational materialists that have studied our Bible and tried our best to live the Word, that we're just going to be miraculously just saved from having to do any of this work, right? From having to go through the hard trials that we're all about to face. They just hope and wish, that they're the lucky ones that get spared from that. But the valley of the shadow of death, here you go, right here. Let's get to work, because truly, Christ is not coming in the clouds. I know your Bible says that. I know you've been taught that. It's a misunderstanding. Christ is coming here, through the heart, through our consciousness, up into here to sort of fill us completely so that we are all embodied with love, compassion, healing, all of these things, without having this constant battle of these transitory states. And this is the second coming, but we have to invite it in. We have to do the work. We have to till it in and work it. It's our work to do. It's not just a free gift handed to us because he died on the cross. It's not. We have to work. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Work it out. There's another important part of the scripture that I want to talk about that really, I feel like, brings this home. When the Pharisees were asking Jesus, where is heaven? They were trying to basically trick him because he was saying that he was the Son of God, right? And they didn't believe it. So they were trying to trick him. Well, where is heaven? And Jesus basically told them, well, you're going to look here and you're going to look there, but guess what? The kingdom of heaven is in you. How many people still to this day are looking here or looking there? They're looking for the kingdom of heaven to be anywhere but within themselves. The other thing is that the book of Revelation, when it talks about the end times, the times that many, many people believe we are living in now, the end times, when it talks about that, it says there was a war in heaven. So if the kingdom of heaven is within us and there was a war in heaven, what's happening? There's a war within us, you see? So this is the work that we have to do. This is the battle that we have to fight. You follow me? So the next thing I really wanted to say is that we are one. We are one united race. We are evolving with increased knowledge and technology back into a non-duality, expanded way of knowing. We have always been one, have always been co-creating. We have always been plugged in to the collective unconscious, but we've lost awareness of this and through our blindness have become controlled by forces like puppets. It's time to reclaim ourselves. The Mandela effect is a wake-up call to invite us in to explore reality, where reality occurs. This is not who we are. We are soul seed. It's the role that we're playing in a false reality of fourth dimension. The Mandela effect is not to confuse us, but to remind us of who we are and to understand that it is we who must bring the second coming of Christ into consciousness. Okay, so that's kind of the next thing that I want to talk about just briefly is this Mandela effect. And I've talked about in other videos as well, and I'm going to continue talking about it. I know a lot of people are really scared and they don't understand and they think CERN is doing this, Illuminati is doing this, because we lived in this very fear-based sociopathic culture that seeks to destroy us and that's telling us that we're small and that we don't matter. And getting back to this, that's the thing, is that the culture that we are in is a very anti-life culture. Our suicide rate, our drug addiction rate, all these things, we could just go on and on and on about how weighted down that people are under the burden of this anti-life system. It's squashing us, it's destroying us, and we feel every bone in our body is crushing under it. right? And so it's natural to just think like the Mandela effect. Here we go, like one more thing that they are trying to do to mess with us or you know, alter our destiny. But I just want to encourage you that I believe in my heart of hearts this Mandela effect is us. It's not them versus us. That's doing this again and going all back into this insanity again. You see, if there isn't an Illuminati, a controlling elite, and there probably is. You know what? There probably is, because what happens to those people is they were soul seeds just like you and I, but generation after generation after generation. And the more and more and more and more power that they got, the more this shadow just sort of so took over them that they are consciously, a lot of them, at this level. Not all of them. I mean, there's some politicians that do this, but there are some, perhaps at the toppest levels, who are very insidious and very entrenched in the anti-life spirit, because they've had so many generations and so much money and so much like enculturation into that money and power system that they're just completely shadow. A lot of people would call them reptilians. Well, we do have what neuroscientists call the reptilian brain. And so there is a sort of metaphysical aspect to that very much could be a reality. But the thing that I really want to drive home about that is that if that truly is the case, and that truly is your reality and how you sort of see the world as us versus them, you have to understand that we collectively have created that. We have created them. And we can go out and overthrow them and we have a war and use our weapons and use our words, and we could do all these things to sort of try to get those anti-life people out of office. But guess what's going to happen? If we're not doing this work right here, the next guy that comes up to replace that guy that we got rid of is going to ultimately evolve in a very, very short time, probably in that individual's lifetime, to be this. Because it's so entrenched in our system. It's just so entrenched in our system. So the only way that we're going to overcome this, overthrow it, change it, make it happen is here, is starting right here. And when we do that, you see, then it's end game. So what the Mandela effect really I see as being a positive thing, because it's really causing people to step back and go, whoa, wait a minute. Who am I? Where does reality occur? I'm confused. I don't know. And it's making people sort of step into themselves and question themselves, question their sanity, question their way of knowing, question who they are, question what they've known, question themselves. So it's bringing people in to ask these questions. And as they go in more and more, it's going to invite them down more and more and more to this reality. People who are experiencing the Mandela effect, this is where they're sitting, right? They're here in the heart. They're saying, no, I know what I know. And this whole rational thing that you're telling me that no, it's like this is a radical push into here for you, okay? So there's still people that haven't experienced the Mandela effect, and they're still here and they're still clinging to this. But it's coming. So those of you that are sort of experiencing that first, get to work, because when these people come, they're going to need us to show them the way. Some of us have had that awakening much longer ago, and we've been doing a tremendous amount of mountain moving within ourselves over a long period of time. And we're here to actually help the people that are just now experiencing it through the Mandela effect. Okay? So when you sort of say, well, you're not a Christian, and you continue on in this, you're not helping the situation. Everything's going to crumble. Do you understand what I'm saying? Everything's going to crumble. And the Bible and Christianity is just the start. It's just the start. It's going to keep going. The economic system, the political system, the governmental system, all of it The religious system, the educational system, the medical system. I could go on and on. These are all things that we've created that have been part of and have resulted in a completely sociopathic, anti-life society. And if we go on like this any longer, we are going to destroy the human race. And it's not just the Illuminati versus us. It's us as well, killing our planet, being cut off from our heart, not caring for one another, participating in the wars, killing animals, on, right? Cut off from the heart. So this is the royal road in my opinion. That's the way I see it. I feel like the Mandela effect's a blessing that our future selves have brought it to us to help. Maybe God's brought it to us to help awaken us and open us up. Another thing I want to say about that and the Mandela effect, I know I've talked in previous videos a little bit about shamanism. It is sort of my frame of reference. It's just one aspect of many aspects of who I am, and I'm not really in a place to even define myself anymore, so I just resist titles and labels. But shamanism is something that I know a little bit about, and it very much fits into sort of a quantum view of the world. And one of the things that I have learned in my journey of shamanism is that when we have a nightmare, we tend to wake ourselves up because the emotion of it is so intense that it's unbearable. And so we wake up and then we call it a bad dream. Shamans don't call that a bad dream. What they call it is an unfinished dream. It's because you lost courage to finish out the dream. So what they encourage people to do who've had bad dreams is to go back in with intention, either in your sleeping time or in your waking non-local imagination. Go back into the dream and finish it out. Finish out. Grab a hold of that energy that was so intense you couldn't stand it and just write it out and finish the dream. And then it loses its power over you. You see, we kind of are in that time where this Mandela effect is triggering this. Oh my God, it's a bad dream. And it's so intense. We just want to wake up out of it, but we don't exactly know how. I just want to encourage you, though, that a shamanic path in that would be to just write it out, finish the story the way you choose to finish the story. One final thing I want to say about the Mandela effect before I go. About 3 years ago or so, I came across iPet 2. It's a CGI video. If you haven't seen it, I'm gonna link it in on this video. So I encourage you to go see it. If you've seen it, you're familiar with it, then that's great. I'd encourage you to go back and see it again after you watch this. But when I saw iPet 2 a few years ago, my first impression with it was I was actually enthralled by it. I watched it several times over and over, and it did seem like it had a lot of Illuminati imagery in it. But I was kind of confused because a lot of people were like, oh, and just really upset by it, and they were really sort of feeling like it was a very anti-life message, a lot of fear, and like it was some sort of prophetic showing us what was going to happen, and it was all this sort of destruction by the Illuminati and the government elite, and it just there was a lot of discussion going on about it, and it's still sort of out there on YouTube and stuff, a lot of discussion and analysis of what it means and deciphering it from the Bible, and I mean there's just a lot out there, and I watched a lot of that. At the time though, when I first saw it, that didn't really resonate with me. It just didn't resonate with me. I watched it and I felt something hopeful, something about life, and I couldn't really articulate it fully, but I just didn't feel an anti-life message in it. Well, that recently came across my radar again. I watched it last week or the week before. I intentionally looked it up. It wasn't even anybody talking about it. It was me going, hey, remember that video, iPet 2? Let's go check that out again. And I'm trying to build up my playlists, and it was one that I wanted to add to my CGI playlist. So that's sort of what prompted it, is me working on my playlist. And I went and watched it again, and I was just blown away. Just in the 3 or so, years that since I watched it the first time, the amount of work that I've done and the amount of consciousness that I've gained in that amount of time. Watching it this time around, I was blown away. I just felt like, wow, this is so right on. This is exactly what's happening. So I really want to encourage you um, to go watch it again, but to drop all the narratives that you have about it. Drop what you think you know about the Illuminati, about George W. Bush, about Barack Obama, about, the 9/11. Just Osama bin Laden. Just drop all of that narrative that you have about that and go in like a blank slate with fresh eyes, and maybe bring some of this that I've been talking about with you when you go in to watch it, and see if it feels different, if it has a more sort of hopeful feeling to it. In the meantime, what I've done is, in watching it again, right away I noticed in the first kind of scenes that are going on in that, the Mandela effect. I mean, it just jumped out at me like, oh my God, that's it right there, the Mandela effect. So what I did is I went through and I took a few screenshots of some stills, and I'm going to cut the video and start showing you the stills. It'll just be my voice overlay so that you can hear me talking about what I'm seeing, how it's showing the Mandela effect in terms of everything that I just talked about here. And so, yeah, kind of exciting.
Okay, in this first still shot of iPet Goat 2 at 32 seconds into the video, we see former President George W. Bush, and he's in a classroom. This is the classroom. It's a representation of the classroom that he was in and visiting on September 11th when he got the news that the World Trade Centers had both been hit by airplanes. And so we know and understand this, but let's put that aside for a moment and let's just assume like that never happened. We don't know anything about that. And let's just look at the very plain facts of this scene alone outside of the context of that. What we see is former President George W. Bush. He's sort of in this weird state. If you watch the video, he does this whole little dance, and at no moment that it actually is representing him is he completely clear and appears to be in ordinary reality. I don't know if he's in a lucid state, in some sort of dream state, if he's in a hypnotic state, but it's very clear he's trying to speak and the words are coming out. They're sort of jumbled. You can kind of understand what he's trying to say, but there's not a coherence to it. And then there's also an echo. So he speaks, and then there's this weird sort of echo that occurs, almost as if here's reality, and then here's parallel realities that are occurring, sort of, that are similar to but different from, if that makes sense. What happens is he jumps up out of his chair after going through this real odd sort of lucid babbling state, and he does this tap dance, this song and dance, where the room darkens and he's lit up by this 5-pointed star, and he's tap dancing on this floor of duality that represents darkness and light, sort of the mirror image of each other. He's tap dancing on this floor, and he has a dunce cap on, which again tells us something about him being, the targeted one, the bad one, the stupid one, the one that's causing problems for people, disrupting the classroom, whatever, right? This is what we did with the students who acted out. We shamed them, put the dunce cap on him, sat in the corner, and shamed them. So he has the dunce cap on, and he certainly does appear in the video very unintelligent, unintelligible. But the interesting thing here, not trying to get off on commenting on, the social view of George W. Bush, but if you just look at this still, you can see he has a moment when he's dancing, when there's this sort of echoing that occurs, where there's multiple overlays of images, where at least one other image that's behind him of him, sort of like a little shadow, a little and it's much more translucent. So it gives this weird kind of effect of something going on with him. And I'm not sure if this represents sort of like a parallel reality, in the same way of his voice echoing, sort of this reality that's right there next to him, but not quite. The other thing I want to mention real quick before I move on to the next scene, where we'll talk about all the different things that are happening behind him, is if you look at the alphabet that's up behind the teacher's left shoulder. We have the little and then the big representation of the English alphabet. And you see they're kind of skewed a little bit over here and there. But in particular, the ones that really stick out is the O, which is definitely skewed and not lined up. And then also the Z, Oz, O-Z. So yeah. All right, let's move on to the next scene. 54 seconds into the video, as you can see, we have this scene of former President George W. Bush in the classroom. Okay, and the first thing we would say is that, number one, it's obviously a classroom. He's in a classroom. A classroom is a place of teaching, a place of learning. It's sort of a secluded bubble where we go and, I guess you could say, become indoctrinated or learn. We see on the floor, obviously, it's black and white checkered, which represents the duality, light, darkness, sort of in a combined and mirrored image. We see Bush sitting in a chair, and he's pointing a finger. He has a dunce cap on his head. In other words, he's been targeted, or, he's the bad one of the bunch. He's the unintelligent one of the bunch, the one that just can't keep it or hold it together, right? Interestingly, let's look at the wall here. Up behind his shoulder, we see a bunch of different, very unique snowflakes. This immediately reminds me of Masaru Emoto's work with the Messages in Water, in which he said, that we can control our environment through our mind, and that things have more direct and immediate effect on things than what we realize. This very much would fit into a quantum understanding of reality and our ability to manipulate reality. Above that, we also see a map of the states. Interestingly, how many states there are is a big discussion in the Mandela effect community. On the other side of Bush, we see an F equals a negative F. Now, again, this is the same thing, a sort of an inversion or a mirrored image, much like the black and the white. Another interesting note about that is that several of the misspellings that people are noticing about the Mandela effect are centered around F. I'm not saying all of them by any means, but there are several of them where there's missing Fs in things that people remember there being Fs. So that's something to note. And I'm not saying that this directly means F, but just, again, showing the mirror image, the F equals the negative F. To the right of that, we have the brain, and it's being split in two by a lightning rod. Interestingly enough, Jesus said in Luke 10:18 that he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And real briefly, this is another thing that I really didn't talk about when I was talking about the false light. The Bible also refers to Satan as the shining one, the morning star. So that very much could fit. And a lot of Christians will say that there is a light aspect of Satan that can be deceptive. That definitely could represent the false light. But for what I'm really wanting to point out is that the lightning bolt and what Jesus had said, that he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And so we see this lightning bolt splitting the brain into two sections. On one section, we have it would be on the right side of the brain. We have the F equals negative F. Typically, the right side of the brain has to do with creativity, emotion, the more female aspects. Now, I don't know if this actually is being supported by current neuroscience, but for a long time, that's been the belief that's been perpetuated, that the right side is the more female side, the more creative, intuitive, emotional side of the brain. And then we see on actually the left side of the brain, the dragon. This would be the more rational, analytical side of the brain. If you move over just more to the right next to the teacher, we see an anatomical heart. Now, this is really interesting because if you think of this all in terms of what I just shared with you, all of this symbolism really does fit in with the split brain, the differentiation between the brain and the heart. But I want to make another notation on this. This heart here is an anatomical heart. If you actually move up a little bit onto the chalkboard, and it's sort of cut out, but these are actually drawn hearts. The difference being the analytical heart is, the much more rational materialist way that we would view the heart, and the drawn hearts represent obviously the much more sentimental, emotional, inner aspects of our experiences and how we express ourselves through the heart. The next thing about this scene that I really want to point out is we have this game of hangman going on the chalkboard, and this guy's got one leg left, and then that's it. If you don't guess the next letter correctly, end game, right? We lose. Well, if we look at the word that's being spelled out by the game, it's obviously evolution. But let's particularly look at the missing letters. What those missing letters to continue spelling out evolution would be is UIO. Again, is this an inverse of IOU? Instead of being IOU and you just mirror it or flip it, inverse it, and it's UIO. What is this actually really telling us? This whole scenario to me sort of speaks about this moment we are at right now in our evolutionary history, and I definitely do see the Mandela effect. It's really interesting because Bush itself, if you watch the video, he's very, his consciousness is altered, and so he appears to be almost drunk or sort of lucid, perhaps even hypnotized. He's sort of stuttering or not quite finishing his sentences. His sentences are somewhat incomprehensible. There's an echo to them. Again, almost like the Mandela effect, where you hear it and then there's a slight echo, maybe representing a parallel reality that's similar but not quite exactly. And so, let's get to the next scene here. Okay, in this next still, I just happened to catch it at exactly 1 minute and 2 seconds. And it's an interesting still because it shows President George Bush with his head looking back towards the chalkboard, but his head is in a very unusual and unhuman position. He actually in the scene turns his entire head around, almost like an owl would turn their head around. If you notice up in the upper left-hand corner, sort of above everything else, is an owl with the large eyes. So sort of the wise one, the all-seeing eye, and then, Bush with this owl-like behavior with his neck. But exactly at this moment in the scene, I caught it. Behind his head is actually on the chalkboard a house that has some flames coming out of it as if the house is burning on fire. But his head actually covers up the house. So what we see is sort of these flames coming out the back of his head. And then in the front of his head, we see this shark, this very angry, sort of hungry, I'm going to eat you shark that is, obviously external to his head and positioned in such a way almost as if it's going to eat his brain or attack him in some way. So again, we see the front of his brain being sort of attacked by this predatory shark-like, and then out of the back we see flames shooting. If you go down again to the hangman, the game of hangman that is there, it's interesting. The only letters that are appearing here in this particular still frame is EVOL, and it almost looks as if it says evil. I'm not sure there's a up here in the corner, up here in the top, it's impossible to miss this, right? It's almost the first thing that your eye catches is this sort of ejaculating penis. I'm not sure. I'm contemplating on this. There's several different things. We could say this is sort of like wasted life force, carelessly wasted life force. We could say this is just life force. We could say it's almost like it almost looks like it's a missile, right? A projectile that the shape of it is obviously a penis, but it almost does look like a missile, and the ejaculate sort of coming in this trajectory, and it almost appears like it would hit Bush in the forehead, but I think not. Actually, if you follow it out, it seems almost as if it would hit the top of the shark. So it's interesting if you think about everything that I just shared regarding the Antichrist and the shadow and whatnot. If the shark sort of represents Satan, or the one that seeks to devour, and then you see this ejaculating penis as sort of a life force, then we could see like life and anti-life. And life itself is actually going to come down and hit the shark on the top of the head. Most likely. So yeah, that's interesting. And then again, in this particular shot, I just want to point out that we also see this sort of double with the two images of Bush, and one of them being much more translucent than the other. So it does, again, create this sort of parallel reality that is next to and similar, but not exactly lined up the same. So again, the question is this sort of representing not just, the Mandela effect, but also everything that I just shared with you? In this final still shot that I took for this at 1 minute and 46 seconds in, as we're exiting the whole classroom scene, and there's way more material to actually review and analyze happening in there. But I really just wanted to focus this on the Mandela effect, and then also what everything else that I just got done sharing. So I may go back and reanalyze this in much more detail in a different video. But for right now, as it immediately exiting the whole classroom scenario and all of that that's happening, we see, in this sort of snowy location, desolate location right outside of there, written on the wall, it says Psalm 23. And again, we interestingly see this lightning bolt sort of coming out and going right through that. The very next scene of this is sort of the American flag being ripped, and the star, a single star, and then it just goes on out into the world and sort of what's happening outside of the microcosm of the classroom in the whole entire world. It's a lot of sort of destruction and things going on. But interestingly, Psalm 23 is a very cherished song by many, many Christians. It's the one that sort of brings them comfort in times of trial and difficulty. It's the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That was King James Version. So yeah, the Psalm 23, and then as I said, it sort of pans over into literally the valley of the shadow of death, where all sorts of things, including the church built out of snow is crumbling. The interesting thing for me, and the thing that provides me the most hope, is that the center figure in the entire iPet coat too is the Christ figure, and he has his eyes closed for most of the video, up until the church starts to fall into the water, and then he opens his eyes. But it's interesting because his heart is blazing. There's a flame coming out of his heart, and he's, like I said, his eyes are closed. He's seeing with his internal, his intuition, his inner knowing, and not with his rational brain of his eyes being open about what's happening. And so I think that all of that really does fit into everything that I have said today, and I hope that you can watch this video and find as much comfort in it that I have.
Okay, so what do you guys think of that? Kind of compelling. I don't know. It makes me want to actually like go through and analyze the whole entire iPet Goat 2 again from my own sort of perspective. I don't know if I'll have time to do that and make a video about it, but I might. Maybe one of you will find the courage to sort of rethink it and reshape it and you know, create a different ending. Um, and that truly is the thing, you know, is like I was saying, you know, shamans know and understand that a bad dream is just a dream that becomes so intense that we wake ourselves up from it. And, you know, we have to go in and finish that dream, grab onto those intense emotions and just ride them out and finish the dream. So finish the dream. Maybe it does have a happy ending, right? So, yeah, go back, watch iPet Go 2. Let me know what you think about it. One thing I'm pretty sure of is that Louis Lefebvre, the man who produced and directed that, I'm pretty certain that he's not a member of the Illuminati, that he wasn't trying to spread, you know, any kind of Illuminati message. I think that he truly was coming from his heart, and I see a lot of heart in it, and I see a lot of hope in it. So I hope that you did too. And I just want to tell you guys, thank you for hanging in with me this long. I hope that this brought you some sort of understanding. I love you all so much. I thank you all for showing up at this time, this incredible, amazing time that we're in. And I really am envisioning a future where, hand in hand, locked in arms, we are moving together towards the future. That doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, as all that sort of stuff is coming down, just like we saw in iPet Goat 2, all that crumbling down and coming down, everything that's been revealed, all of it coming down. We need to continue doing our work. We need to be ready for those people that are coming in later, you know, to sort of deal. In the meantime, we have to learn to deal with all of this, and understanding that really a lot of it can be coming from our own shadow and our own projections, but some of it's not. Some of it is just the embodiment, And then we have to learn how to respond and integrate that from our life, from a point of view of life, and sustaining life, respecting life, so that we integrate as one in heart. So I encourage you that, and just, I love you guys. I love you guys so much. Just thank you so much.